Chosen one, your kindness was a test. The elite just gave you the master key. The truth does not knock politely on the door of your reality. Sometimes it kicks the door completely off its hinges, shatters the glass, and drags you by the collar into the blinding light of day. Most people spend their entire earthly existence running frantically from this kind of raw, unfiltered truth. They do not necessarily hate intelligence, purity, or genuine goodness. What they absolutely despise is the deeply uncomfortable, agonizing way your unapologetic intelligence and your raw goodness make them feel about their own carefully curated, highly performative lives. Welcome, chosen ones. If you are listening to this, you are currently standing in the heavy, smoke-filled aftermath of a profound spiritual revelation. You have been navigating a deeply confusing, isolating, and exhausting season, surrounded by individuals who operate like self-appointed gatekeepers. You have been dealing with highly insecure, toxic, and wildly performative people who have been secretly trying to mimic your light while simultaneously attempting to drag you down into the suffocating swamp of their own stagnation. You have offered them grace, you have extended an open hand, and you have operated from a space of pure empathy, only to watch them frantically attempt to weaponize your decency against you. Validate this experience right now, in your own mind. You are not crazy, you are not overreacting, and your intuition has been dead accurate from the very first day. Your kindness was recently put through a rigorous, almost violent test. These people pushed you, they prodded you, and they attempted to exploit your grace, genuinely believing they were outsmarting you. They thought they were playing a grand, sophisticated game of psychological chess, maneuvering you into a corner of quiet submission. But they fundamentally misunderstood the spiritual gravity of the person they were dealing with. Your kindness was never a symptom of naivete. It was a high-level diagnostic tool. You were not being played, you were silently gathering data. And in their arrogant, frantic attempt to break your spirit, these imitators just handed you the master key to their entire psychological matrix. They exposed their hands, they showed you their true faces, and they completely melted down over the very success and alignment they tried so desperately to prevent. Let us break down exactly why their behavior has become so frantic, why they exposed themselves, and why you hold absolute power. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder. Let's get into it. Number 1. They critically mistook your profound grace for profound gullibility, entirely exposing their predatory instincts in the process. We must first establish the absolute fundamental contrast between how you operate and how the toxic mimic operates. You, as a chosen one, operate from a place of hard-earned internal alignment. Your kindness is not a tactic. It is a natural, unforced overflow of the deep peace you have fought for in the dark. You are stacking heavy, solid bricks on an immovable bedrock of truth. Their entire existence, however, is a borrowed, deeply insecure, externally validated facade. Because they live in a constant, exhausting state of calculated manipulation, they naturally assume that everyone else is doing the exact same thing. When you offered them genuine kindness, forgiveness, or the benefit of the doubt, their deeply broken psychology immediately interpreted that as a glaring weakness. They looked at your open, generous hand and saw an invitation for exploitation, completely failing to realize that a person who can offer grace in a world this cold is operating on a level of immense strength they cannot even begin to fathom. They behave this way because their fragile egos are absolutely terrified of genuine vulnerability. To the highly performative individual, kindness is nothing more than a desperate survival strategy used by the weak to avoid conflict. They look at your empathy and see a target on your back. It is exactly like a petty, arrogant thief successfully picking the pockets of a man who literally owns the entire bank, genuinely thinking he has scored a massive, historic victory, while the bank owner simply watches him with a mixture of quiet pity and mild amusement. You were never blind to their manipulation. You were quietly, analytically observing it. You deliberately gave them just enough rope to hang their own false narratives. You allowed them to walk into the room, set up their little traps, and proudly explain their brilliant schemes, completely unaware that the room was entirely soundproof and locked from the outside. From an external perspective, their behavior looks incredibly tragic, frantic, and deeply goofy. They are walking around bragging to anyone who will listen about how easily they manipulated you, completely oblivious to the fact that your kindness was the very spotlight that exposed their spiritual poverty to the entire universe. They thought they were the masterminds of the situation, but in reality, they were just lab rats running enthusiastically on a wheel you built to test their endurance. Number 2, you forced them to violently confront the profound spiritual stagnation they have spent their entire lives trying to outrun. There is an undeniable, staggering contrast between the quiet, resting state of your authenticity and the hyper-vigilant, sweating panic of their daily performance. You do not have to wake up every single morning and frantically remember who you are supposed to be. Your identity was forged in the brutal fires of genuine healing, radical self-reflection, and absolute accountability. They, on the other hand, are desperately trying to stack flimsy, waterlogged cards on a wildly windy table. The imitator behaves with such hostility toward you because they are profoundly terrified of their own stagnation. They look at your life, your raw energy, your natural charisma, and your unbothered peace, and they try to put it on like a cheap Halloween costume. But wearing someone else's spiritual frequency is exactly like wearing a massive, heavy, deep-sea diving suit on dry land. It is incredibly clumsy. It is suffocatingly heavy, and it makes them look absolutely ridiculous to anyone with even a single ounce of true discernment. Their deep psychology is rooted in a total, terrifying lack of an internal home. Because they categorically refuse to do the agonizing, unglamorous work of facing their own shadows, they have to constantly steal the light of others just to feel visible. But the exact moment they step away from the mirror of your energy, they feel that creeping, paralyzing void returning to swallow them whole. This is precisely why their attempts to copy you always look so frantic, strained, and unnatural. They see the calm, but they do not see the resilience that birthed it. They see the supreme confidence, but they completely ignore the thousands of lonely, tear-soaked nights of internal battle it took to secure it. They are acting exactly like someone wearing flashy, oversized, cubic zirconia jewelry they cannot afford, strutting around a party while drowning in crippling, unpayable spiritual debt. When you simply exist in their presence, radiating authentic growth, it triggers a massive existential crisis within them. You are the living, breathing proof that evolution is possible, which immediately destroys their favorite, comforting excuse that the world is just unfair and everyone is secretly as miserable as they are. Your continuous, undeniable elevation forces them to look down at their own feet and realize they haven't moved a single inch in a decade. Number 3. They viciously projected their own transactional morality onto your pure intentions, completely short-circuiting their own minds. You operate from a high-frequency paradigm where doing the right thing is its own inherent reward. Your kindness does not come with a hidden invoice attached. You do not love people on credit. The toxic, highly performative individuals in your orbit, however, view every single human interaction as a cutthroat business transaction. They do not give a compliment without fully expecting a favor in return. They do not offer help without silently tallying a massive debt that they intend to collect with interest. Therefore, when you extended unconditional kindness, wisdom, or support to them, it completely broke their psychological framework. Their corrupted operating system simply cannot process the concept of genuine, agenda-free goodness. They immediately became intensely suspicious of you. They started digging, analyzing, and plotting, trying frantically to figure out what your hidden ulterior motive was. This paranoid behavior stems from a terrifying, world-shattering realization. If unconditional kindness actually exists in the world, then their entire manipulative transactional way of living is not a necessary survival tactic, but a conscious choice. A choice that makes them the undeniable villain of their own story. It is exactly like bringing a piece of solid, pure, heavy gold to a pawn shop owner who has only ever dealt in cheap, painted lead. Their counterfeit detector keeps going off uncontrollably simply because the machine does not know how to register the real thing. Their absolute inability to comprehend your lack of an agenda drove them into a paranoid, sweating frenzy. They began aggressively self-sabotaging the connection, attacking you preemptively because they were sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This tragic, self-fulfilling prophecy happens because they are literally biologically incapable of living in an atmosphere of pure grace. The air is too thin for them there. They had to pollute the environment, create unnecessary drama, and inject toxicity into the dynamic just so they could breathe normally. They destroyed the best thing that ever happened to them simply because their lungs could not handle the pure oxygen of your unconditional kindness. Number 4. Your absolute, unbothered silence became a devastating mirror that completely shattered their fragile ego. The contrast here is between your deeply rooted capacity to sit comfortably in absolute stillness and their desperate, clawing need to fill every single void with chaotic noise and emotional reaction. When you finally caught on to their performative nature, their subtle digs, and their covert sabotage, you did not immediately launch into a loud, messy, screaming match. You did not write a long, emotional, defensive paragraph trying to prove your innocence. You simply stopped engaging. You pulled your precious energy entirely back, and you just watched. This silent observation is the absolute most terrifying thing you can possibly do to an insecure mimic. Their entire psychological structure relies heavily on the feedback loop of your emotional reaction. They desperately need you to be angry, hurt, or defensive so they can perfectly calibrate their mask and play the role of the innocent victim or the superior, objective victor. When you observe them in absolute, unbroken silence, you completely strip away their script. Their ego begins to rapidly starve to death. This is exactly why they started acting increasingly erratic, throwing passive-aggressive tantrums, spreading bizarre rumors, and manufacturing massive drama out of thin air. It is akin to a terribly under-rehearsed actor stepping onto a grand stage, delivering their lines with exaggerated, sweeping passion, only to suddenly realize the audience is completely empty, the cameras are off, and the house lights are fully turned on. The illusion is violently shattered. They try to provoke you, poking and prodding, desperately hoping to extract just one single drop of emotional supply to prove to themselves that they still hold some measure of power over you. But your stillness is a massive, impenetrable titanium wall that they just keep running face first into. From the outside, their frantic attempts to get a reaction out of a completely unbothered, deeply aligned person look profoundly embarrassing, pathetic, and deeply goofy. They are shadowboxing a ghost, completely exhausting themselves in a fight you never even registered for. They exposed the terrifying monster under their bed entirely by themselves, just because you refused to turn out the lights and play along with their nightmare. Number 5. The catastrophic failure of their attempt to weaponize your deep empathy against you. For years, society and broken people have tried to convince you that your high-level empathy is a fatal flaw, and the toxic individuals in your life truly believed they could use it as a permanent lever to manipulate you forever. The contrast is incredibly stark. To you, empathy is a highly advanced spiritual compass, a high-bandwidth data connection that allows you to accurately read the emotional and energetic reality of any room you enter. To them, empathy is nothing more than a glaring vulnerability, a soft, exposed underbelly practically begging to be exploited for personal gain. When they tried to play the victim, spin their elaborate sob stories, or use heavy guilt trips to force you into submission, they fully expected you to fold. They expected the old, unhealed version of you, the one who would quickly abandon your own boundaries to save them from the consequences of their own terrible choices. But they failed to realize that your empathy has evolved into hyper-discernment. Their deep psychological flaw is the arrogant assumption that a kind heart implies a weak spine. When they tried to aggressively weaponize your empathy, they accidentally handed you a high-powered magnifying glass to intimately inspect their true rotten motives. They genuinely thought they were hacking your system, but they were actually triggering your impenetrable spiritual firewall. It is exactly like trying to intentionally drown a fish in water. What they thought would suffocate you and break you down is exactly the element you use to navigate the truth and breathe freely. You felt their pain, yes, but you also felt the cold, calculated, mechanical manipulation running underneath it. When you calmly, firmly stated your boundaries instead of rushing in to rescue them, their entire psychological architecture completely collapsed. They realized with profound, freezing terror that your empathy is no longer a blind spot. It is a highly calibrated military-grade radar that sees directly through their most carefully constructed disguises. They tried to use your heart as a weapon, only to discover it was forged in indestructible steel. Number 6. The overwhelming psychological torture of your radical, unannounced detachment. The contrast between how a healed, chosen one leaves a situation and how a toxic, performative mimic leaves a situation is the difference between night and day. When they discard someone, it is always a loud, chaotic, messy smear campaign, specifically designed to inflict maximum damage and secure external validation from their flying monkeys. When you finally decided you had seen enough of their circus, you simply evaporated. You closed the door quietly, locked it securely from the inside, and walked away without leaving a forwarding address or an explanation. This radical, clean detachment is absolute agony for the insecure mimic. Their bloated ego aggressively demands an explosive finale. They want the screaming match, the tears, and the dramatic closure, because conflict heavily implies that you still care. It implies they still hold significant weight in your emotional world. By detaching without a dramatic, fiery exit, you completely denied them their closure and their inflated sense of importance. The psychology behind their intense suffering here is rooted in a devastating total loss of control. They spent months, maybe even years, meticulously trying to control your perception of them, and your sudden, peaceful absence proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that all their exhausting effort was a colossal waste of time. It is exactly like someone spending hours screaming vicious insults into a perfectly soundproof room where the acoustic panels absorb every single vibration. They are left with absolutely nothing but the ringing silence of their own toxicity. You did not fight them. You simply removed the entire battlefield. This dynamic drives them absolutely insane. They will stalk your social media from fake accounts, casually ask mutual friends about you, and obsess intensely over your silence, desperately trying to find a tiny crack in your peace. But there is no crack. Your detachment was not a manipulative tactic. It was a permanent, irreversible graduation from their low-frequency classroom, and they are furious that they were held back. Number 7. The sheer, unadulterated panic when their manufactured script suddenly loses its lead actor. The performative hater does not live in objective reality. They live in a highly curated, deeply fictional theater production where they are always cast as the misunderstood hero or the flawless, untouchable victor. You were heavily cast in their mind as the designated supporting character, the person meant to applaud their success, quietly absorb their projection, and eventually serve as a stepping stone for their grand elevation. The contrast here is that you categorically refuse to live in a fictional script. You live in the raw, unedited, heavy truth of the present moment. When you simply stopped playing the role they assigned to you, when you stopped intentionally dimming your bright light to make their dim bulb look slightly brighter, their entire production came to a grinding halt. The psychology of this panic is fascinating to observe. They literally do not know who they are if they are not being actively compared to you. Their entire identity is strictly relative and comparative. If you are not there to play the lesser person, the confused person, or the jealous person they desperately want you to be, they are violently forced to look at themselves in a vacuum, and what they see in that vacuum absolutely terrifies them. It is exactly like a mediocre understudy triumphantly stepping onto the main stage, screaming their rehearsed lines with exaggerated, sweaty passion, only to suddenly realize the entire auditorium has walked out into the streets to watch the original actor perform authentically for free. They are left standing alone in a ridiculous, oversized costume, sweating profusely under the hot stage lights, performing for absolutely no one. Their frantic scramble to recast you as the villain to anyone who will listen is just a desperate, pathetic attempt to keep the play running and the funding alive. But the spiritual elite have already permanently cancelled the show. The curtains have closed, and everyone with real, genuine discernment can see the pathetic desperation leaking from their eyes. Number 8. The crumbling illusion of their superiority against the quiet, unshakable reality of your sovereignty. The people secretly competing with you thrive entirely on the illusion of social and spiritual hierarchy. They desperately, physically need to believe they are smarter, more attractive, more successful, or more spiritually evolved than you are. Their entire sense of fragile self-worth is built precariously on this shaky ladder of constant comparison. The contrast is that you do not care about the ladder. You do not even acknowledge the ladder. You operate from a place of sovereign, deeply anchored self-acceptance. You are not trying to be above them. You are simply existing happily within your own authentic alignment. When your genuine success, your radiant peace, or your spiritual elevation naturally surpassed their manufactured, heavily marketed hype, the narcissistic injury they suffered was catastrophic. They behave with such venom and covert hostility because your very existence completely invalidates their illusion. They rely heavily on external markers, flashy titles, expensive possessions, exclusive social circles, and loud, continuous bragging to desperately prove their worth to strangers. You rely entirely on internal architecture, unbreakable peace, profound resilience, quiet integrity, and radical self-love. It is exactly like watching someone loudly boast about wearing a massive diamond-encrusted crown that they financed with crippling high-interest debt, while you walk barefoot and happy on hundreds of acres of lush land that you own free and clear. The crown looks incredibly heavy, tacky, and burdensome, while your freedom is effortless, expansive, and infinitely more valuable. They hate you not because you attacked their superiority, but because your quiet sovereignty proved beyond a doubt that their superiority never actually existed in the first place. You forcefully make people confront the deep, authentic intelligence and power they willingly abandoned in exchange for cheap, fleeting applause. Your presence is a flawless mirror that reflects the tragic reality of their hollow achievements, and they want to smash the mirror rather than do the hard work of changing their reflection. Number 9. The terrifying realization that they can easily copy your aesthetic, but they can never, ever reproduce your anointing. We have all seen the goofy, almost tragically hilarious phenomenon of the mimic who suddenly starts dressing exactly like you, using your specific vocabulary, adopting your obscure hobbies, and trying desperately to replicate your creative output. They become intensely obsessed with your external presentation. The contrast here is the massive difference between a cheap, grainy Xerox copy and the priceless original master painting. You are the sole originator of your energy because it was birthed exclusively from your unique suffering, your deeply personal relationship with the divine, and your unique, agonizing healing process. They are simply tracing the outline with a dull pencil. The psychology behind this frantic mimicry is a profound, gnawing dread of their own internal hollowness. They genuinely believe that if they just acquire the exact right packaging, the empty contents inside will magically transform into something valuable. But frequency absolutely cannot be counterfeited. The spiritual realm does not recognize a mask, no matter how much it cost. When they try to step into important rooms using your copied aesthetic, they find themselves completely ignored, overlooked, or awkwardly, painfully out of place. It is exactly like someone buying the hollow fiberglass shell of a Ferrari, painting it the exact same glossy red as yours, but outfitting it with the struggling engine of a broken lawnmower. It looks the part from 50 yards away in the dark, but the exact second they try to hit the gas and actually accelerate into real spiritual or life challenges, the engine violently sputters, chokes, and breaks down in the middle of the intersection. The people around them, and the spiritual elite observing the situation, can immediately feel the jarring dissonance. The mimic realizes, with crushing, suffocating embarrassment, that the anointing is not in the clothes, the buzzwords, or the curated aesthetic. The anointing is deep within the soul, and a soul is the one thing they cannot steal, borrow, or buy from you, leaving them stranded in their own inadequacy. Number 10. Their subconscious, boiling, acidic resentment of your completely unbothered peace. The toxic, performative competitor lives in a constant, agonizing state of emotional turbulence. Their joy is not intrinsic, it is entirely extracted from their environment. They have to constantly siphon energy, validation, and dramatic reaction from everyone around them just to feel momentarily okay. The contrast is your unbothered, ocean-deep peace, which is entirely self-generated and eternally renewable. When the violent storms of life hit, or when they specifically try to launch a covert, highly calculated attack against your reputation, they fully expect you to crumble into pieces. They expect you to become bitter, angry, paranoid, and vindictive, just like them. When you respond with unbothered peace, extending grace, and maintaining a laser focus on your own continuous growth, their resentment rapidly mutates into a toxic, boiling obsession. They absolutely hate your peace because it brutally highlights their own internal chaos. The deep psychology here is a severe, malignant form of envy that has crossed the border into pure malice. They are furious that you have built a sanctuary within yourself that they cannot infiltrate, sabotage, or corrupt with their dirty hands. It is exactly like a deeply infected, hungry parasite that happily latches onto a host, only to discover with horror that the host's immune system is so incredibly powerful and sovereign that the parasite simply starves to death on the surface of the skin. They are starving for your reaction. Their passive-aggressive remarks, their subtle digs, their pathetic attempts to isolate you, it all falls incredibly, embarrassingly flat. From the outside, It looks like someone furiously throwing tiny paper airplanes at a massive steel fortress, genuinely hoping to cause a structural collapse. Their resentment eats them alive from the inside out, burning holes in their own stomach, while you continue to sleep soundly, completely untouched by the pathetic little war they are waging entirely in their own minds. Because they cannot drag you into the storm, they are forced to stand in the rain alone, watching you through the window of a house they can never enter. They are trapped in their own weather system, and your sunlight is an offensive reminder of everything they lack. Number 11. The total, unavoidable structural collapse of their entire narcissistic architecture. You cannot build a life on lies, manipulation, and the continuous energetic theft of others and expect it to stand the test of time. The contrast between your two paths is now becoming undeniably visible to everyone. Your internal framing is forged from the heavy, unglamorous, indestructible steel of truth, extreme accountability, and divine alignment. Their foundation is made of cheap papier-mâché, held precariously together by gossip, performative alliances, and incredibly fragile egos. When the universe inevitably brings a real storm, when genuine challenges, heavy spiritual tests, or unavoidable consequences arrive, their entire structure begins to violently and publicly collapse. The psychology of this collapse is heavily characterized by absolute denial and intense, frantic projection. As their superficial relationships fail, their unearned opportunities dry up, and their carefully managed public image begins to visibly crack, they will frantically try to blame you. They will whisper that you cursed them, or that your sudden departure is the sole reason for their downfall. But the absolute truth is, the rot was always there, eating away at the floorboards. You were just the only one brave enough to hold the flashlight. Watching their architecture collapse is exactly like watching an arrogant termite try to chew its way through a solid titanium beam, violently breaking all of its teeth in the process, and then loudly blaming the beam for being too hard. Their downfall is entirely an inside job. They engineered their own destruction the very moment they decided to prioritize cheap external validation over deep internal integrity. As a chosen one, you do not even have to lift a single finger to exact revenge. The immutable spiritual laws of cause and effect are dismantling their false empire brick by brick, while you simply sit back, sip your tea, and watch the inevitable, flawless physics of truth take over, proving that gravity always wins against illusion. Number 12. Your sudden, undeniable elevation from an accessible target to an absolute, untouchable sovereign. There was a time, perhaps not too long ago, when these people had direct access to you. They had your phone number, they had your sympathetic ear, they had your time, and they had your energy. You were on the ground floor with them, trying desperately to pull them up, offering advice, sharing your light, and genuinely hoping they would choose to heal. But the contrast now is absolutely staggering and undeniable. Through your quiet endurance, your absolute refusal to sink to their toxic level, and your unwavering commitment to your authentic path, the spiritual elite have permanently moved you from the crowded, noisy ground floor to the exclusive, quiet penthouse of spiritual authority. The psychology of the hater looking up at you from the bottom is one of profound, nauseating vertigo. They used to view you as a peer they could comfortably disrespect and casually manipulate. They used to think they could treat you as an option while demanding to be treated as a priority. Now, they are forcefully made to watch you operate on a frequency they cannot even comprehend, let alone reach. They are stuck repeating the exact same low-level karmic lessons, dealing with the exact same petty, exhausting dramas, fighting the same circular arguments, while you have completely and permanently graduated from their dimension. It is akin to someone standing waist-deep in a filthy mud puddle, furiously throwing handfuls of wet dirt at a massive airplane cruising comfortably at 30,000 feet. The dirt does not even come close to reaching you. It simply falls right back down and covers them entirely in their own filth. This elevation is not about arrogance, nor is it about a superiority complex. It is about pure, unavoidable spiritual physics. You have become untouchable because your frequency literally no longer intersects with their dysfunction. They can scream your name into the void. They can tell fabricated, desperate stories about the old version of you they once knew, but their words have absolutely zero power in the high-level rooms you are now naturally entering. You have been secured, sealed, and elevated far beyond their pathetic reach. Your presence in their life is now nothing more than a ghost of an opportunity they squandered. Number 13. The suffocating agony of their realization that your kindness was actually a test they miserably failed. When the dust finally settles and the adrenaline of their manipulation wears off, the most intelligent among your haters will experience a terrifying, cold moment of absolute clarity. They will look back at the entire timeline of your interaction. They will clearly remember the times you offered them grace when they absolutely deserved your wrath. They will remember the times you stayed politely silent to protect them from their own public embarrassment. And the devastating, crushing contrast will finally hit them. You were never the naive victim. You were the divine test. The psychology of this realization is utterly crushing. It induces a deep, unshakable, agonizing shame that they will try desperately and fail to bury. They realize that the universe, God, the spiritual elite, however you wish to frame the highest authority, specifically placed you in their life to give them a rare, golden chance to finally evolve. Your kindness was a strong hand reaching down into the pit to pull them out of the mud. And instead of humbly taking the hand, they arrogantly tried to pull you in. By violently biting the hand that fed them spiritual nourishment, they permanently sealed their own fate. It is exactly like a dying man crawling through a scorching desert, being offered a canteen of crystal-clear, ice-cold water. And instead of drinking it, he violently smashes it on a rock because his fragile ego is angry that he didn't find the water himself. Now, the water is completely gone. The sun is beating down relentlessly, and he is left entirely alone with the agonizing knowledge that his own pride is the sole architect of his demise. They failed the test. They proved to the universe they cannot be trusted with the light. And because of that massive failure, the spiritual doors of genuine opportunity, deep connection, and true elevation have been firmly and permanently locked in their face, leaving them to wander the wasteland they created. Number 14. The final irreversible transfer of spiritual authority and the bestowing of the master key of discernment. This is the ultimate, glorious culmination of your entire journey through this specific, grueling fire. The contrast is final and absolute. You hold the pen to your own bright destiny, while they have been entirely, unceremoniously erased from your storyline. They are no longer a threat, no longer a lesson, and not even a memory worth revisiting. The psychology of their current state is the quiet, suffocating, terrifying despair of absolute irrelevance. They know, deep down in their rotten core, that they permanently lost the best thing that ever happened to them when they forfeited your authentic support. But the massive reward for you, the chosen one, is the master key. The spiritual elite have seen your incredible resilience. They have seen that when you were handed the sharp knife of betrayal, you did not use it to stab back. You used it to cleanly cut the cords of attachment. Because you steadfastly refused to let their creeping darkness corrupt your brilliant light, you have been officially granted absolute spiritual authority over your own atmosphere. This master key allows you to walk into any room, anywhere in the world and instantly, flawlessly decode the energy. You will absolutely never again be fooled by a performative smile, a fake victim narrative, or a borrowed, highly unstable frequency. You completely command the space you occupy. It is exactly like the dark shadows instantly, violently disappearing the moment the sun reaches high noon. The darkness does not put up a fight. It does not argue. It simply ceases to exist entirely in the presence of absolute, undeniable light. You have been handed the heavy golden key to your own sovereign kingdom. You dictate who enters, you dictate who stays, and you dictate the exact frequency of your reality. The brutal test is over. The results are in. You have won, and you have won completely. When you finally zoom out and look at the absolute totality of this profound, exhausting, yet deeply liberating experience, one monumental truth becomes entirely impossible to ignore. The battle you just fought was never really about the physical arguments, the petty jealousy, the social circles, or the external competition. Their real target from day one was always your internal architecture. They wanted your energy. They desperately wanted your alignment. They wanted the deep, unshakable peace that you hold inside your spirit, simply because they are completely destitute and starving in theirs. But the universe does not allow spiritual theft on this massive level without profound, inescapable consequences. The people who arrogantly tried to play you, mimic you, and break you only succeeded in providing the exact necessary friction required to sharpen your absolute discernment to a razor's edge. They were nothing more than the rough, disposable sandpaper used by the divine to flawlessly polish your crown. You do not ever need to seek revenge. You do not need to exhaust yourself explaining your side of the story to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. You do not need to perform your healing or your success for an audience of critics. Your only job now is to firmly take that master key, unlock the massive doors to your highest destiny, and continue effortlessly building your beautiful life on the solid bedrock of your authenticity. Let them have the chaotic noise, the petty drama, and the frantic, suffocating exhaustion of their borrowed lives. You possess the quiet, unshakable reality of true sovereignty. Keep growing, keep shining, and let your completely unbothered existence be the absolute final word in this chapter. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder. Stay chosen, stay blessed.